You ever wonder why some of the best PlayStation 2 games just disappeared? I'm talking about absolute bangers that deserved sequels, remasters, entire franchises gone, buried, and forgotten. In this video, we're digging up those lost gems, games that hit hard, played even harder, but for some reason, the studios just walked away. Trust me, if you owned a PlayStation 2, you're about to remember why it was the king of its time. Cold Fear dropped back in 2005 and barely made a splash. But looking back now, it had something special. It was the first real shot Ubisoft took at survival horror. And even though they never tried again, they actually nailed a lot of what makes the genre work. You play as Tom Hansen, a Coast Guard officer who gets thrown into a nightmare while investigating a Russian whaling ship stranded in the middle of the Bering Strait. The place is falling apart, waves smashing into the deck, everything shaking like it's about to sink, and then the bodies start moving. Whatever hit that crew turned them into something way worse than dead. The vibe is claustrophobic. You're stuck in tight hallways with flickering lights, rusty metal creaking with every step. It's that kind of old-school horror that doesn't rely on jump scares. It just makes you feel uncomfortable the whole time. The ship is basically a haunted house at sea. Now, people love to compare Cold Fear to Resident Evil 4, and yeah, they share some DNA. Over-the-shoulder shooting, infected enemies, and lots of action. But Cold Fear had its own flavor. It leaned heavier into atmosphere, and it took risks that Resident Evil 4 didn't. The setting alone gave it a different edge. You're not in a village or a castle. You're trapped on a boat in the middle of nowhere with no backup. What really went under the radar were the files and documents scattered around the game. Most players ignored them, but they actually build out a way more complex story. There's talk of government experiments, Russian mob connections, secret biological weapons. It's all there, hidden in notes and reports. If you piece it all together, the plot goes way deeper than it seems at first. And that's the frustrating part. Cold Fear was setting up something bigger, maybe even a sequel, but it just vanished. No remaster, no follow-up, not even a spiritual successor. It was a one-and-done deal, like it never existed.
Jackson was strictly small time. Then 6 weeks ago, he starts dealing a new mystery drug around the neighborhood.
Back in the PS2 era, there was this wild little game that flew completely under the radar. Most people never even heard of it, and if you did, chances are you rented it once and never saw it again. The name was Narc. A gritty, third-person action game that pulled zero punches. You played as two former narcotics officers, Jack Franzinski and Marcus Hill, thrown back into the chaos to take down a new drug called Liquid Soul that's tearing through the streets. Sounds like a typical cop story, right? But this wasn't your average good guy versus bad guy setup. Narc dove into moral choices, letting you arrest suspects or straight up beat them down. And yeah, you could use the same drugs you were supposed to be taking off the streets. Messed up? Definitely. But also kind of bold for the time. But what really gave Narc its edge was how unpredictable it felt. 1 minute you're patrolling a sketchy alley, the next you're in a full-blown shootout with gang members high out of their minds, and the game doesn't hold your hand. You could pick up random contraband off the ground, pills, syringes, powder, and using them would give you short bursts of strength or speed, but it always came at a cost. The screen would distort, your aim would get shaky, and the whole world felt unstable. What a lot of people don't know is that Narc wasn't just a one-off PS2 experiment. The original game dropped way back in 1988 in the arcades. It was a fast-paced, over-the-top run-and-gun game where everything exploded and enemies came at you like a flood. The 2005 reboot tried to keep some of that insane energy, but threw it into a darker, grittier world full of shady deals, street gangs, and corrupt cops. Despite its ambition, the game got buried. Critics weren't too kind, the controls were clunky, and the tone was all over the place. But underneath that rough surface was something weirdly captivating. It had that chaotic, underground charm that made it unforgettable if you actually gave it a shot.
So you're You're Joey. I want to thank you for looking after my boy.
Back in the PS2 days, there was this gritty third-person shooter that flew under the radar for most people. Made Man. It dropped in 2006 and threw you straight into the dark underworld of 1970s New York, where the only way out was up or dead. You played as Joe Ivarola, a Vietnam vet who gets pulled deep into the mafia life, forced to relive his rise through the ranks, one brutal memory at a time. The game takes you across 3 decades, bouncing from war-torn jungles to the cold, violent streets of Brooklyn, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. The vibe is raw, the gunfights hit hard, and the story feels like something ripped from a mob movie. If you've played games like The Godfather on PS2, you'll recognize the structure. Same kind of cinematic missions, urban shootouts, and old-school mafia drama. You could also tell the devs went all in on the atmosphere. The soundtrack leaned hard into that gritty 70s vibe, with dark, moody jazz and funk tracks that made every alley shootout feel like a scene from a Scorsese flick. Even the voice acting had this rough, authentic edge that fit perfectly with the story's tone. But Made Man had its own flavor. The gunplay was heavy and loud, with a real dirty street-level energy to it. It wasn't polished like the big names of the time, but that almost made it feel more grounded. And while it didn't break new ground mechanically, the mix of personal storytelling, changing environments, and unforgiving combat gave it a style that stuck with those who played it.
Fuck yourself, Marilla. Fuck you right back.
There was one Mortal Kombat game that dared to do something different. Mortal Kombat Shaolin monks threw out the usual 1v1 fights and dropped us straight into a brutal beat-em-up adventure. You played as Liu Kang and Kung Lao, smashing through waves of enemies with fluid combos, co-op fatalities, and some of the most satisfying melee combat on the system. This wasn't just a side project. It felt like a full-blown action game set inside the chaotic world of Mortal Kombat, with iconic stages, boss battles, and lore that connected straight to the original trilogy. From the fiery pits of the Netherrealm to the classic temples of Earthrealm, everything felt familiar, but way more alive. One thing that often gets overlooked is how well the game balanced its pacing. It wasn't just non-stop button mashing. Between the intense fights, you had light platforming sections, environmental puzzles, and even hidden challenge rooms that tested your skills in unique ways. On top of all that, the upgrade system was surprisingly deep for a beat-em-up. As you tore through enemies, you earned experience points that let you unlock new combos, special moves, and brutal fatalities. But it wasn't just about flashy attacks. You could also boost your health, increase your power, and fine-tune your playstyle depending on how you like to fight. And the attention to detail was unreal. Midway's built-in secrets, unlockables, and even multiplayer modes made this thing endlessly replayable. It had story, nostalgia, and gameplay that hit harder than a flying bicycle kick. And the wildest part? They never followed it up. No sequel, no remaster, just silence. To this day, fans still beg for a return, because for many of us, Shaolin Monks was one of the best Mortal Kombat games ever made.
James? What? Who are you? Mom, I thought you told me never to talk to strangers.
Like I said before, Jimmy.
Back in 2006, Bully came out of nowhere and flipped the open-world genre on its head. Instead of gang wars or massive cities, this time Rockstar dropped you into a messed-up prep school as Jimmy Hopkins, a teenage troublemaker with a chip on his shoulder and zero patience for authority. Bulworth Academy wasn't just a school, it was chaos. Bullies ran wild, teachers were corrupt, and every corner had some kind of drama waiting to explode. What made Bully so damn good was how grounded it felt. You weren't robbing banks or leading crime syndicates. You were pulling pranks, getting detention, sneaking out after curfew, and taking down school cliques one by one. The jocks, nerds, preppies, greasers, every group had their own turf and rules. And Jimmy didn't care. He was there to wreck the hierarchy and make the whole school bend to his will. Missions were creative, the world felt alive, and the writing was razor sharp. It was Rockstar at its most experimental, and somehow it worked perfectly. But not everyone saw it that way. Bully sparked a ton of controversy when it launched. Some media outlets and parent groups went off, calling it a school shooter simulator or accusing it of glorifying bullying, even though the whole point of the game was to fight back against the system. There were protests, lawsuits, and a lot of headlines that painted the game as way darker than it really was. That kind of attention might have scared off any chance of a sequel. Rockstar's no stranger to backlash, but Bully was a different kind of heat. Schools, politics, bad press. It's the kind of mess that can make a publisher hesitate, no matter how good the game actually was. Also, every time rumors about a sequel start to pop up, they get buried under the weight of GTA 6 hype. And let's be real, Rockstar's all in on that now. So for anyone still hoping to return to Bullworth, it's probably going to be a long wait.
Move it along, punk.
The garbage looks suits you.
Hey, quick break. If you're enjoying this PS2 nostalgia trip, hit that like button. It takes less than half a second and your thumb won't even notice. And drop a comment too. If you could bring just one of these games back with a sequel or remaster, which one would it be? Or just scream "revive this game" in all caps. That kind of comment really helps the algorithm push this video to more people. And that's how you help the channel keep dropping fresh content every single day. Plus, I read and reply to every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, bro, I'm not saying I'll cry, but the tears are loading. Hit that sub button and let's keep the channel going. Driver parallel lines dropped players straight into the gritty streets of New York, but with a twist that made it stand out from every other open-world game on the PlayStation 2. You don't just live one era, you live two. It starts in the 70s, full of muscle cars, bell-bottom energy, and a raw, dirty vibe that feels straight out of a classic crime flick. You play as TK, a teenage wheelman with insane driving skills who gets caught up in a setup and ends up serving nearly 3 decades. When TK gets out in 2006, the world's completely different. The skyline has changed, the music's different, and the streets aren't the same ones he tore through as a kid. That transition hits hard. It's not just a visual shift, the whole game atmosphere changes. Cars are modern, tech is new, and even the way people act feels colder, faster, more distant. It's a rare kind of storytelling that lets you feel time pass without needing a cutscene to explain it. And here's the wild part. When you drive through Manhattan in 2006, the Twin Towers are gone. It's a tiny detail most games wouldn't even bother with, but here, it's used to show how deeply the world has moved on. It's a bold move that makes the game hit different. Even though it's technically a spin-off, not tied directly to the mainline driver story, Parallel Lines had its own voice. It wasn't trying to be GTA. It carved out its own lane with tight driving mechanics, cool car chases, and a revenge plot that felt personal without going over the top. This game deserved way more love. And imagine a remaster now, with all that environmental detail pushed to modern graphics. It would be insane. But like a lot of forgotten PS2 gems, it just got left behind.
He's in his chopper. Now's your chance, TK.
How about you light?
In fourth place, we've got one of the most savage games to ever wear the Marvel logo, The Punisher. Released back in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, this one didn't hold back. You step into the boots of Frank Castle, a man who watched his entire family get wiped out by the mob. What follows isn't a quest for justice, it's straight-up war. This game didn't care about being subtle. It was raw, unfiltered violence. You weren't just shooting enemies, you were punishing them. And the game gave you dozens of brutal ways to do it. Interrogations got graphic, takedowns were extreme, and the whole thing felt more like a fever dream than a superhero game. But that was the point. One of the wildest mechanics was the use of the environment for executions. You could slam enemies into shark tanks, smash their heads in industrial presses, or shove them into vats of acid. It wasn't just gore for shock value. Each kill felt tailored to the setting, making every level feel dangerous in its own twisted way. And the game even had a morality system baked into it, where the more sadistic your punishments, the darker Frank's mindset would become. Visually, it leaned into the comic book aesthetic while still feeling gritty and grounded. The story wasn't trying to be complex, it was personal, dirty, and vicious, just like Frank Castle. Now here's the kicker. Despite how bold and memorable it was, The Punisher never got a sequel. For a game that pushed so many boundaries and had such a unique tone, it got left in the dust. Just another PlayStation 2 relic buried by time.
Bobby's my boss, alright? He collects the money and gives me my take. Huh? Oh! Ah!
In 2005, True Crime New York City hit the shelves with all the attitude you'd expect from a gritty, street-level open-world game. You play as Marcus Reed, a former gang member turned cop, navigating a brutal version of New York after being promoted to detective. The game kicks off hard. His mentor is murdered, and Reed dives headfirst into a tangled mess of crime, corruption, and revenge. It had the style, the swagger, and a brutal combat system that made it feel like a raw, unfiltered take on law enforcement in the city that never sleeps. What made it stand out wasn't just the story. It was the insane level of detail in the city. You could enter buildings, patrol neighborhoods, bust criminals, or go full rogue if you felt like it. One underrated feature was how your choices actually shaped how people reacted to you. If you played clean, citizens respected you and cops had your back. But if you got dirty, taking bribes, using excessive force, dealing drugs, the city pushed back. Stores would close their doors, pedestrians would run from you, and the entire vibe shifted. It was messy in the best way, like a sandbox begging to be broken. Now here's where it gets frustrating. There was supposed to be a sequel. In 2007, United Front Games started working on a follow-up set in Hong Kong. But in true Cursed franchise fashion, Activision pulled the plug. Square Enix swooped in, bought the rights, and repackaged the game as Sleeping Dogs. And yeah, Sleeping Dogs is great, but it's not true crime. It ditched the legacy, the characters, the connection. By 2014, Activision had completely abandoned the true crime name. No revival, no sequel, just silence. And that sucks. Because this franchise had serious potential to grow, evolve, and hold its own next to giants like GTA. The blueprint was there, they just never followed through. Gun dropped at a time when the PS2 was overflowing with creativity, and still, this game managed to stand out. It's an open-world third-person western where you play as Colton White, a young guy raised by a hunter who turns out to be much more than just a father figure. After a brutal betrayal and a deadly ambush, Colton is thrown into a violent journey across the American frontier. From Montana to Kansas to New Mexico, every dusty road and hostile saloon is packed with danger. The map was massive for its time. You could ride horseback across wide-open plains, hunt down outlaws, blast enemies with old-school rifles, and even throw dynamite like a maniac. The missions were intense, but it was the side quests that added real weight. Bounty hunting, animal tracking, poker games, saloon fights. It had it all. What really added depth to Gun was its upgrade system. As you completed missions and side activities, you earned tokens that could be used to improve your weapons, health, and abilities. You could make your revolver reload faster, give your rifle more punch, or upgrade your horse for better speed and stamina. It wasn't overly complex, but it gave you real incentive to explore every corner of the map and take on challenges outside the main story. The upgrades made a noticeable difference in combat too, especially when the heat really kicked in during large-scale shootouts. People love comparing it to Red Dead Revolver, but honestly, Gun was sharper, faster, and way more fun to play back then. It didn't need to copy anyone, it had its own flavor. And let's not forget, this came from Neversoft. Yeah, the same folks behind Tony Hawk and the old Spider-Man games. That team knew how to make something addictive. But here's the thing, Gun never got a sequel. It just vanished. Maybe the success of Red Dead Redemption scared off Neversoft, or maybe Activision just didn't see the money in it. Either way, it's a shame. Gun had the heart, the grit, and the gameplay to become a full-blown franchise.
Drink.
check it out. I thought places like this only existed in movies.
Black was one of those games that made the PlayStation 2 sweat. No joke. It pushed the console to its absolute limits with explosive visuals, insane sound design, and gameplay that felt like something straight out of a blockbuster movie. You played as Jack Keller, a CIA operative caught in the middle of a dangerous mission in Chechnya, and the way the game told its story through a gritty, cinematic interrogation just made everything feel 10 times more intense. The gunplay in Black was next level. Every bullet felt heavy, every reload had weight, the environments crumbled with your shots, the lighting during explosions looked unreal for the time, and the audio was pure chaos. You'd hear bullets ricocheting, your teammates shouting, and the world around you breaking apart like you were in an action movie. This game didn't just look good for the PS2, it looked impossible. But here's the sad part. After all that impact, Black just vanished. A sequel was planned and even had a name, Black Second Mission. The devs at Criterion were working on it, but things fell apart. Internal issues with EA killed the project. And yeah, that hurts. Because this wasn't just some random FPS, it had potential to grow into a full-on franchise. Instead, what we got years later was Body Count. Same dev DNA, similar mechanics, different name. It tried to carry the spirit of Black, but without the same spark. And since then, just silence. Black became one of those legendary titles fans bring up when talking about games that deserved way more. It's just another example of how big publishers fumble greatness. EA's done it before. Just look at what happened with Battlefield. They chase hype, forget the core, and end up burying iconic games. And don't even get me started on Need for Speed. Gorgeous graphics, but the handling feels like driving a shopping cart down a hill. Black could have been so much more. It deserved a future. And maybe one day it'll get one. But until then, it stays locked in the memory of every PS2 gamer who picked it up, pulled the trigger, and never forgot that first explosion.
Heads up! Enemy moving out of the museum! I'm going in!
So now I want to hear from you. Out of all the games we talked about, which one do you think deserves a second chance the most? Drop a comment, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. I read and reply to every single one. Let's talk in the comments.